My guest today is Nigel Farage, who is, well, though he is skeptical about the expression, the leader of the unofficial opposition in the UK and the head of the United Kingdom Independence Party. And you're now running at close to 20% in the polls, are you not?
Yeah, we've had an amazing rise. And in fact, on May the 2nd this year, we had a whole rash of elections in the English counties, not the big cities, but in the shires. And in those elections, we got nearly a quarter of the vote across the country, which was pretty astonishing stuff. Even I was surprised. So there's something going on here. And I think it's really twofold. Firstly, it's about policy. And we have a basic principle that we should be a self-governing, independent, democratic nation, which may sound obvious to all your viewers, but we've given it away. We've literally given away the ability to make most of our laws to Brussels. We've given away the ability to control our borders. It's costing us a lot of money. That's the first reason UKIP's doing well. We're resonating, on a massive constitutional question. And the second reason we're doing well, and we're seeing snaps of this in other parts of the Western world, is there's been this almost total victory of social democracy. The Conservatives aren't conservative anymore, the Labour Party aren't that socialist anymore, and the Liberal Democrats don't really know who they are. And so you've got these three parties who are so close to each other in terms of policy position, but also the people are so incredibly similar. They all go to a handful of the best schools, they all go to Oxford, they all study PPE, they all leave Oxford and become researchers in political offices, and they all become MPs age 27 or 28. And we finished up, if you look at the front benches, there's no one there that's set up a business. There's no one there that's risen up through the trade union. There's no one there that's founded a charity or been a soldier. There's just no connection with the ordinary real world. So part of our vote, I'm not ashamed to say it, part of our vote is a rejection of this political class and a desire for a kind of politics that is based on an understanding of how families live out there, and also perhaps being unafraid to say what you think.
Yeah. Well, and not all our viewers would realize that in Britain there's really only one parliament. There's only one elected House of Parliament. And at any time, the next 5 prime ministers are sitting in it, usually.
Oh, that's right, yes.
So it's just a group of 630 people, and if the leadership of it is as you described, which it is, when I first used to follow these things, there were self-made people there, like Ernest and Marples, and people who built businesses. Even someone like Michael Heseltine, he ran a business at least.
No question about it. Yeah. Big publishing house. Yeah. And you look back at sort of Labour in the 1970s. People like Dennis Healey, who was the Chancellor. Now, he might have been a hard left socialist and not to my taste.
He's a charming man, though, and he took a drink, too.
He certainly did that. But he was also a beach master at Anzio.
Yeah,
one of the most dangerous jobs in the war.
Yeah.
So these people had real breadth of experience. And it's funny, one of the other things that's changed is our politicians used to be quite funny.
Dennis was.
And there were humorous asides. Yeah. And that's gone as well, because the sort of victory of political correctness, everyone's scared to say what they think. And I think with UKIP, what I get from people on the streets of London and elsewhere, they say your party is like a breath of fresh air.
Well, and if I don't say this just to flatter you, Nigel, but your YouTubes are a tremendous draw everywhere in the world. And when you get up in the European Parliament, which is the only parliament in history with more interpreters than legislators, and start haranguing the so-called European executive, and really get into top gear, you know this. You could change careers and just become an entertainer if you wanted to.
Well, it's not a bad idea, but not just yet. It's interesting because the growth of UKIP would not and could not have happened without the internet. And
I'm sure that's true.
And the reason is that the BBC,
they boycott you.
The British Broadcasting Corporation, would not give their viewers the benefits of my gentle discussions in the European Parliament, but through YouTube, it's accessible to everybody. UKIP would not be where it is without YouTube.
Yeah, well, you've really built that party. And again, just allow me to say a few words for Canadians not that familiar. No one must confuse the United Kingdom Independence Party with the British National Party,
no.
Skinheads and racists like that. You have a very serious, comprehensive program that it's not excessively conservative. It's traditional in respect of British values.
It's actually,
but it's a free enterprise program. But you're not trying to send
we're classical liberals.
Yeah, you're not trying to. But you're not trying to send every disadvantaged person out to sell pencils or something.
No. And it's quite interesting. I mean, because of the Commonwealth and the history and the shared history, we've actually since the last war been very open in this country to Commonwealth immigration, but to have it on a managed, sensible scale.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from the 1950s onwards, something like 30 to 50,000 people a year from around the Commonwealth would come and settle in this country. Mm-hmm. Since Mr. Blair got to power, the numbers that now come into Britain are 500,000 a year. I mean, it is...
And they're not, and I want to be clear, I don't mean anything disparaging about this, but they're not the most assimilable parts of the Commonwealth. They're not all from Canada and Australia.
No, I mean, we've obviously had a lot of people come from the subcontinent. A lot of Muslims come.
And many of them are damn good. That's not the issue. The point is sometimes it's hard to assimilate them in those numbers.
I mean, certainly in some of our northern cities, that now have a very big, significant Muslim population, there have been difficulties with assimilation. I mean, I was, as I go around the country, I see in eastern England particularly, that all the agricultural jobs, all the factory jobs, have all been taken by people from Poland, Latvia, Lithuania. Now, many of them are very good, hard-working people. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. And you can understand why a big employer might want to take these people on.
And they're grateful to be away from communism.
And many of them are, and many of them send money back home and all the rest of it. But you do have a problem when youth unemployment in Britain, by which I mean 16 to 24-year-olds, youth unemployment in Britain has doubled in the last 8 years. We now have 1 million of our youngsters on the scrap heap. So that also brings another level of social problem. Managed migration is the sensible, responsible thing to do, but our difficulty is, as members of the European Union, we can't do that. And on January the 1st...
I'm sorry, but what happened to the Schengen Convention and all that sort of thing?
We are not part of Schengen, so we do actually ask people to show their passports when they're coming in, but we don't do any more than that. There is no restriction on the numbers of people that can come into Britain from Eastern Europe. And this issue is reaching fever pitch in British politics.
And are they entitled by virtue simply of arriving to stay as long as they want?
Oh, yes. Yes. All they have to do is to get permanent leave to remain, and they do that by getting a national insurance number. And it is an easy process. And actually, within 2 weeks of being here, you can claim job seekers allowance, i.e. unemployment benefit, qualify very quickly for housing benefit, and qualify for child benefit, even if your kids live in Warsaw. I mean, so there's a big problem there. There's a big problem there.
So this is EU only then? Someone say from the Republic of India couldn't do that?
It's much more difficult for them to do so, although, as I say, Blair did. I mean, Blair pursued, and this is not conspiracy theory, Blair pursued a deliberate policy to try to alter the demography and makeup of this country. That is out there. It is an established fact. He said he wanted to rub the noses of Conservatives in diversity. Well, to a very large extent, through immigration, he's done it. Now, we still have the ability to decide who comes in from the subcontinent, for argument's sake. But what we will lose on January the 1st is the ability to decide who comes here from Romania and Bulgaria.
No.
Now, they're two countries that, let's be honest, haven't actually recovered from the decades of communism. They are deeply...
Or the fascists superseded them.
Well, I mean, these are troubled countries, and they have within them a dispossessed Roma population of between 4 and 5 million. And I've been, in the last year, I've visited the big Roma encampments in Sofia, in Hungary, and in Bucharest, in Romania. And on a human level, it is very difficult not to feel sorry for people who won't be given a job because they're totally excluded from society, who live in conditions, I mean, frankly, you simply can't believe people still live like this. And I don't blame...
in Europe.
In Europe, absolutely. And I don't blame many of them for wanting to come to a better life where their kids will get educated and where they'll get proper health care and all the rest of it. But we have to think about, maybe putting our own people first. Now, they are the arguments that UKIP and I have been making for some years. The establishment are so scared of us that for making those rational, I think they're rational, calm, sensible arguments about how we deal with these problems, we're now accused of scaremongering, we're now accused of scapegoating, of causing hysteria. So there is a real battle royal going on between UKIP and the establishment over this issue.
You remember Tony Blair used to rail, and I must say I always liked him as a person. He couldn't have been nicer to me and helped me come into their lordship's house, even though I was a Conservative nominee. But he kept railing against the establishment, and finally William Hague, who was the opposition leader, who was a great orator at times, almost in your level, said, you know, he's a 40-something public school graduate, Oxbridge alumnus with a parliamentary majority of over 100. Who does he think is the establishment of this country? Again, so our viewers who might not realize this, as I understand it, your support, the support for your party, is practically uniform throughout the country.
Very much so. I mean,
whereas, say, the Liberal Democrats have these traditional Liberal pockets going back to Mr. Gladstone's time, or Lloyd George, you know, or the Orkney Islands or something.
I mean, British politics has been, let's say since the First World War, it has been regional in the sense that the Liberal Party had the Celtic fringes. So bits of North Cornwall on the Atlantic, bits of West Wales, the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, they were, when the Liberal Party was back to a tiny base, that was where they managed to hang on. And then the rest of politics in this country has been based on class. And the Labour Party came along to be the voice of the ordinary working class people in this country, and so their votes came from the big cities in the north more than the south, and the Conservatives were the party of the middle class. And that's how it's been for 100 years. Along comes UKIP and blows this completely out of the water. And I have to say, perhaps the greatest fun that I have leading this party, when we're out campaigning, there is no area socially that is a no-go area for UKIP. You know, whether it's detached houses costing £2 million each, or the lowest rundown council estate, you with a UKIP rosette can go and knock on doors and talk to those people. So we're drawing our support from across the classes. We're drawing our support not just from Conservatives, but a lot of old Labour in this country are patriotic. They believe in the nation. They hate the thought of these ghastly people in Brussels making all the rules and telling us what to do. So actually, you know, from north to south, east to west, in England, our support is uniform. Scotland is another matter.
But 20% throughout the UK, apart perhaps from Scotland, is a mortal threat to the Conservative Party. If you hold there and they don't make an electoral arrangement with you, they have no chance of winning, do they?
I think that one of the reasons Mr. Cameron won't win is because of how well we're doing, and I understand that. But I think there are more reasons why Mr. Cameron won't win. The first is he's not a Conservative, which makes it quite difficult for Conservative voters. But the second reason is very interesting. I met John Howard, the former Australian Prime Minister.
Very nice man.
You know, a guy
I just come from Australia. He's a lovely man.
He's a great guy,
and he's been here in England the last few days.
Oh yes, and you know, he won 4 elections. And I talked to him about it, and he made the point that for Conservative parties to win in the Western world, they have to get what we used to call the blue-collar vote. And people like Thatcher and Reagan and John Howard, they reached across the normal divides and they picked up.
And Nixon and Eisenhower. I mean, they pulled the working class vote.
This government, led by Cameron and Osborne, who one of their own backbenchers described as a bunch of posh boys who don't know the price of a pint of milk. And these posh boys, they don't connect with the blue-collar vote. And north of Birmingham, in this country, the Conservative Party is dying. So its difficulty isn't just because of UKIP and me. It faces a challenge, a threat. What is it? What does modern conservatism in Britain actually represent?
Well, we knew with Margaret what it represented.
Oh, goodness me, didn't we?
But then they got onto this business of modernization. And it was really just a debunking of the most successful political leader they'd ever had.
Yes, and of course, you see, Blair took the Labour Party, got rid of Clause 4, which was their attachment to state control of things and state ownership.
And really gave the control to the Labour movement, I mean the unions.
Oh, yeah, of course. But Blair took the Labour Party to the right, and he did it on the calculation that nothing would come along under a first-past-the-post electoral system on the left to to do them damage.
Right.
And he was right. When Project Cameron began in 2005, they reasoned that they should take the Conservative Party to the left to occupy exactly the same ground that Tony Blair had carved out for himself, and that if they did that, they would not face the danger of losing votes as they saw it on the right. And then along came UKIP and messed it up for them, because they genuinely thought their voters would stick with them regardless, and the evidence is they won't. And you know, if you talk to traditional Conservative voting families in this country, the kind of families that have been voting Conservative for 150 years, they want to hear a Conservative Prime Minister who is patriotic. I mean, that's absolutely vital. They want to hear a Conservative Prime Minister who understands their concerns about mass immigration, very, very important, you know, the fabric of society. But they want to hear a Conservative Prime Minister talking about business, enterprise, profit, success. That's what they want to hear. And what they've had.
And British greatness. I mean, constructive nationalism, not jingo, not racism, but Britain is a leading, respected country.
And what they've had since 2005 is a guy obsessed with climate change.
Driving his snowmobile around on the North Pole.
You know, out with the Huskies on the glaciers, happy to build wind turbines, which I think, by the way, are the most useless waste of time and money.
They kill birds and cause noise pollution.
Ghastly things. And he's been happy to go down this route. So we've effectively had someone who's virtually a green. He, without a manifesto pledge, thought that pushing gay marriage as an issue was a huge priority for the government. And so these Conservative voters just look at him and say no.
Well, what do you make of the orchestrated talk from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor now of an economic recovery, and it's all coming along and so forth?
I think what's happened is this. Project Cameron, as I say, has been there since late 2005, so it's been in place a long time, and he's been the Prime Minister since May 2010. They recently took on an Australian strategist called Linton Crosby, who's quite a sharp guy.
Whom I've met.
Yeah, sharp guy.
Well, he worked with Boris, didn't he?
He helped Boris Johnson win in London. So Crosby's come in, and he said to them, look, you know, you've actually got to do a 180-degree U-turn in rhetoric on everything you've said for 8 years. So the Cameron speech at the Tory conference this year was, profit is not a dirty word, and we're going to get tough with Europe, and we're going to control immigration. The trouble is, when you've been singing the song for 8 years, you can't, with 18 months to go before an election, turn the ship around and expect people to believe you. And people don't believe him, and people don't trust him.
Have your relations with him improved at all?
No, they're ghastly.
Well, I think it's well known there's a lack of rapport between you, but there's no sign of improvement?
Absolutely not.
But it is notoriously the case that even politicians who don't much like each other can make a deal in the higher interests of maintaining incumbency or joining incumbency. Would you rule out replacing the Liberal Democrats as the partner of the Conservatives?
I'm not going to rule anything out. I mean, it's fairly stupid in life to rule anything out because one never knows. But I would say this. Everybody's talking about the next general election, which we're going to get in May 2015. But we have a national election on May the 22nd next year. It is the European elections, and every man and woman in this country on the electoral roll can vote in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland.
Historically, the turnout's only about 30 to 40%.
Yes, historically,
which shows the lack of British enthusiasm for Europe, by the way.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, they're not. These low turnouts are not because of contentment, believe you me. Yeah. But we've got that national election next year, and my view is that I'm building a new political brand in this country.
Yes.
Right? And we're having some success. It's resonating. It's working. We are changing the agenda of British politics in terms of what's being talked about in the most remarkable way. And I'm not even going to think about or talk about deals in 2015 until we've jumped the hurdle of 2014.
Let us say you have a smashing success, which is widely anticipated, including in other parties, in the European elections. And let us say, just a hypothesis, that getting close to the next general election, and well, I guess it remains he's governed, isn't he, by his agreement with the Lib Dems. He has to go in the spring of 15, doesn't he?
Yeah.
then he, being Cameron. As we're getting close to that, if you're running at between 20 and 25% of the polls, and there is absolutely no chance of the Conservatives being re-elected without making an arrangement with you, and the natural thing happens, and Cameron phones you up and says, "Look here, Nigel, old chap, of course we've had our differences, but your arithmetic is as good as mine, and why don't we see if we can't reach an agreement here?" You wouldn't just slam down the phone with 4-letter words to him, would you?
I never slam down the phone at anybody.
I
have used 4-letter words once or
I'm
twice. But I mean, look, I personally think that Cameron would rather sacrifice his career than pick the phone up to me. But that's my view.
And take his whole party over the cliff?
Yeah, and that's why
Good
I
grief.
think that's why I think there is another possibility. And I think the possibility is that if things next may go as some pundits think they might, and if UKIP has a big success in those European elections, then I think you may get a Conservative Party, and they're very good at this. They operate, it's called the men in grey suits.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And
It was Willie Whitelaw.
that's right. And it may come to the point where they pop in to see Mr. Cameron with a bottle of scotch and a loaded revolver.
You've been a very, very, very good Prime Minister, but it's time to go.
Well, I don't discount that. I mean, it seems to me that if the Conservative Party was led by somebody that actually understood what I'm talking about,
Yes.
that actually felt it,
Yes.
that there may well be the possibility of having an intelligent conversation.
Yes.
All right? Because you see, the point is, there are Labour-held marginals in the Midlands and the North in which the Conservatives haven't got a cat's chance in hell of winning.
No.
But a UKIP candidate might.
Yeah. Or a fusion candidate.
Yeah, that's right. And the converse is true in the south of England. So there could be, at some point in time, an intelligent conversation, but I think for that to happen, Mr. Cameron doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. Well, let us take it one step further. You don't need me to tell you, but not all of our viewers would know that every leader of the Conservative Party since Stanley Baldwin, who took a good look at the Nazis and decided it was time to retire, either was eased out by his party, which in the British Conservative Party is the parliamentary party. It's the MPs who do it.
It's,
eased out or quit before it could happen. And but if they hadn't quit, it would have happened. Everyone, even great leaders
Yes.
like Mr. Churchill and
Yes.
Mrs. Thatcher.
Oh no!
And
I mean,
so-
regicide is well practiced.
Yeah,
at this level of
it's not a self-destructive party in terms of its own motives. It has no death wish, the way the old Labour Party had at times under Michael Foot. So your scenario is not at all an unlikely one.
I agree.
You know, when the men in the grey suits nominated Lord Wilton to call upon Mr. Churchill and suggest at the age of 80, after a stroke, was time for him to retire. And he had great credibility, Wilton, because he was a Labour member of the wartime government who joined the Conservatives after Labour defeated Mr. Churchill. And so Churchill regaled him with stories for 1 hour and then put his champagne glass down and said, "Freddie, I know why you're here and I know who sent you, and you tell them that I'll leave when I damn well feel like it, and if they try and push me, they'll go before I do. Good day." But he was Mr. Churchill.
Yeah, well, quite.
So yes, I mean, there's plenty of precedent for what you say.
Yeah, there is. And the other thing is that much of the talk goes along these lines. UKIP will do well in a European election, but they won't win seats in Westminster under first past the post. And the one thing that will radically change that is the right by-election. Because I think back to the Reform Party in Canada, it was one by-election. It was the schoolmistress that won it, wasn't it? It was one by-election in the late 1980s, and once they'd shown they could win, then all the whole possibility at the next general election in Canada
You're
changed.
very knowledgeable to know that, sure. Not many Canadians would remember that. And
Well,
that is absolutely right. And then of course they just took everything away from the Conservatives. west
You
of
could
Ontario.
argue that there was quite a long period when things weren't sorted out. But what you could also say is what reform started has finished up with a Canadian Prime Minister who was first elected on a reform ticket, and that you find yourselves, with your banking system and everything else, one of the best structured countries in the West. And I think that rebellion that reform represented has done Canada a power of good. And I hope and pray that what UKIP can do in this country is the same thing.
And in Canada, it's not just the Prime Minister, but most of the more prominent ministers are from that wing of the party,
Yes.
not the old progressive conservatives,
Yes, yes,
which
that's
was
right.
itself a union of two parties going back to World War II.
Yeah. So I think we are. I mean, Scottish politics has changed out of all recognition in the last 20 years.
Yes.
Northern Irish politics, where the two main parties in Northern Ireland have now disappeared completely, and two new parties have come along. So, we are going through change in this country.
And in that case, in the special case of Northern Ireland, it has been a, how should I put it, a sort of civilization/humanization of what was virtually a Civil War level political climate for a long time.
It was a civil war on the streets and in the Stormont Assembly. Yeah, I mean, Northern Ireland had been through 30 of the most ghastly years, and whilst things aren't perfect over there, the one thing I think we have to say is that Tony Blair, I didn't like the deal in many ways, but Blair did broker something.
You mean the Good Friday thing?
The Good Friday Agreement let out back into the community over 400 convicted murderers, and I found that very, very difficult to understand.
When I was the chairman of the Telegraph, and we had a fierce argument in the leader conference, but I finally had to put my foot down after both major party leaders phoned me and said, look, I don't particularly like this deal either, but we are not going out on a limb with Ian Paisley and the Shinners. We can't get into bed with them. I mean, this is a respectable newspaper. And I think we played a slight role there. It wasn't a great agreement, but it was the beginning of something.
And I mean,
useful.
actually, do you know what? I was in Belfast this summer, and they still have problems. There are still kick-offs and little bits of violence, but it's nothing like it was.
And the economic improvement is substantial from those days.
Well, the investments come in, and things are better. So, but the point I'm making is that we've had big change in Northern Ireland, big change in Scotland, and in England, that big change is now in the process of happening, in my opinion, and I think that what UKIP represents is a very English revolution.
Absolutely.
But it's happening.
And so you're the Cromwell of our times.
Well, the difficulty is that Cromwell was a Puritan, and many, many things could be said about me, but not that I'm a Puritan.
And he was a regicide. You're not that either.
And I'm not that either. But there is something happening.
And he's a pretty good phrase maker at times.
It certainly was. No, I mean, I'm terribly excited by this.
Well, it's your gig, you see, again, for the benefit of our viewers. You really created this party. I mean, and technically it existed, but it didn't have any following, did it?
No, that's right. No,
well, is there a chance, in your opinion, if the scenario we've discussed unfolds as we've envisioned, you'll start to get MPs, conservative MPs, actually crossing over? You've had a couple of peers do that. I know.
Oh, yes, I think.
I mean, Malcolm Pearson's with you now, isn't he?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Lord Pearson was a Conservative peer for many, many years, and he's crossed the floor.
He's a good friend of mine in that.
I think, you know what politicians are like. If they think they're more likely to win their seat as UKIP than as Conservatives. That's why I say, with every enterprise in life, you need a little bit of luck.
Yeah.
And the bit of luck we need is the right by-election. And if the right by-election comes up for Westminster and we win it, the whole game in British politics will change again.
Like Quinton Hogg's by-election at Oxford University in 1940.
Yes.
Wasn't that when it really began to turn from Chamberlain to Churchill?
Yes, and it did. And it did. We just need one of those moments.
It changed the world.
Yeah. No, we need one of those moments, and that's, and I can't do much about that, but other than just keep going optimistically.
Could I ask you this? You've referred to the possibility that the Conservative Party could contemplate a change of leadership, as they do they do with some frequency. Boris Johnson is often mentioned. Would you work well with him?
Be a lot of fun, wouldn't it?
Oh, it'd be damn
but I'm not sure who the straight man would be.
There wouldn't be one.
I mean, Boris is an amazing character in British politics.
Oh, yes.
I mean, quite astonishing. And I've got a range of children, but my youngest one, she's 8. She would be, she knows who Mr. Cameron is because he's the Prime Minister. I don't think she could name another British politician, but when Boris comes on the television, on the news, in the kitchen, she thinks it's terribly funny. So, Boris is fascinating. He, on policy terms, he tends to flip-flop a little bit all over the place.
No,
but I think in his heart and his instinct, he's much closer to where I am with
Well,
things.
when
than
he
Cameron.
was our representative at Brussels,
Yeah.
reporting for on
Yeah.
the whole Euro thing, he was very sound. He was never hostile in a xenophobic way to these
No.
countries, but very skeptical about whether Euro-federalism was going to work.
Yeah, no, I think Boris is
In terms almost as humorous as yours.
Boris is Boris is a possibility. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't do to speculate, but let's see. Let's see. My mission, and I say it again, my mission at the moment is not to think about what's going to happen 2 years down the road. It's to get this party. I've got to raise money, which against the establishment is not an easy thing to do.
But you're getting more support now, aren't you?
Getting more support, but there's a lot more to do. And I've got to get an electoral machine in place to fight those European elections next year. And I want, on May the 22nd next year, to cause an earthquake in British politics. And that's what I'm really focusing on now.
As you know, Lord Ashcroft does a great deal of polling, and he's a friend of mine. He says that the polls are quite clear that you're the most highly regarded party leader in this country.
Well, we'll try and keep
Well, it's a good place to be.
Well, we'll try and keep it that way.
Canada and Britain are both countries with rising populations, unlike, say, Germany and Russia, but for slightly different reasons, I think. So I'm just trying to think how much the similarity is.
You've got a bit more room.
Nigel, in Canada we have, and indeed I think in a number of other countries, and I just want to see if it's the same here, this phenomenon of it's a combination of things, but the impact of inflation has caused the erosion of savings and improved health care and attention to people taking care of themselves anyway, has fortunately raised life expectancy and the useful working life of people. And this is all to the good, but it has put great pressure on the young people. Now, you mentioned earlier that you have very high youth unemployment in this country. Is that in part for the same reason?
Yeah, it's a factor. Indeed, my own father only retired 3 years ago.
And how old would he be?
He was 75. He was still on the stock exchange, and he thought perhaps the time had come. No, people are working longer.
But
People
you
are
went in
working
this
longer.
country to basically a 60-year obligatory retirement age, 60. In Canada, we
60
really only got to about 65, but 60 is very young to
Yes,
push
I mean,
people
I
out.
mean, public sector was 60, school teachers 60. Yeah, no, people are working on, and actually, what most people are finding is that their private pensions that they've saved for over the years are not delivering, given the cost of living.
Well, if they're not inflation adjusted, they won't do.
They're not, and I have to say also, there's been some quite bad mismanagement of the pension industry in this country. Mr. Brown, one of his first acts as Chancellor in the 1990s was to tax the dividend income on pension schemes.
Completely insane.
Now, of course, all the growth in pensions is the reinvested dividends, so that's caused a big problem too. So we do have a similar problem, and of course, quite how we're all going to cope in 40 years' time with the fact that women living to 100 is going to be quite a common thing. No one quite knows, but we've got a compounded problem here because not only do we have that phenomenon, but we also have, as I described earlier, such large numbers of people now coming into Britain from Eastern Europe who the employers see as being a good bet because they're cheap and they work hard, that we've now got there is a genuine identifiable social problem in this country of a dispossessed white working class. And some people now in this country even use the phrase underclass. And there are several million of them, and that's a big, big social problem, huge social problem.
Do you find that, Britain is not in natural resources terms a rich country apart from oil. And its manufacturing base has considerably declined.
Yes.
But there's been a tremendous emphasis on service industry. But the problem with service industry is that it doesn't add that much value. And I always feel that in North America, both in the US and Canada, and they're rich countries after all, in natural resource terms, that there are too many stockbrokers and lawyers, and they're not adding value to anything. But do you have that problem here?
Yeah, of course there's a lot of truth in that. But I'm actually very bullish about British manufacturing industry, despite the extent to which it's been pared down.
And so much of it's owned by the Europeans.
Well, and Chinese and everybody, but actually there are some good stories. The British car industry, which is not owned by any British companies, but the British car industry is now manufacturing more motor cars than in the history of this country. So there are one or two areas in which we're doing well.
Yeah, but that's all German and Japanese management.
Yes, it is, but hey, if the investment's here and the jobs are here and the tax revenues here, you know.
Well, that's the same in Canada.
And we're living in a globalised world.
Canada.
But one of my big beefs is this. Whilst Mr. Cameron and Mr. Osborne have gone crazy for renewable energy, it has led not just to an increase in domestic fuel bills, but to a huge increase in the energy bills needed by manufacturing industry, because all manufacturers need a lot of energy. And at the same time that we've loaded all these prices onto British manufacturing, the Americans have gone for shale gas, the Chinese have decided coal is the future, and we've disadvantaged ourselves.
And we've gone crazy
hugely.
for natural gas too.
Yeah, I mean, it's mad. And so, you know, when I look at the resources here, we've been very lucky with North Sea oil. We've had a 40-year good run with North Sea oil.
Yeah, and it looks like it's holding, isn't it?
There's still plenty there. But we've just discovered in the northwest of England shale gas reserves that are eye-watering in terms of size and potential. And
Inland.
Blackpool, up
Blackpool?
on the northwest coast.
Does that mean the Labour Party won't be able to meet there?
What it means is that that if we don't look this gift horse in the mouth, if we're intelligent about this, we will make ourselves much more self-sufficient in energy and be able to give not just consumers but our manufacturing industries cheaper energy prices. And it's one of the UKIP policies that we're pushing very, very hard. Difficulty is that our friends in Brussels, who of course control this country, are very negative about shale gas
and in the
and its
name of
development.
the environment, they're just acting enviously.
Yes. Well, of course, it was part of the green agenda that all natural resources would run out. And so suddenly when you get a big fine like this, they find that mentally very difficult to deal with. So I'm not negative about UK manufacturing industry, but we need to give it a hand, and cheaper energy is something we really could do.
Thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you.